One of the questions I get most often is, can you make a tutorial on how to draw cats? And whenever I see this question, I get a little confused and gesture broadly towards this whole thing I've been doing on YouTube for years now. I mean, y'all have watched me draw how many of these fluffy idiots? But in all seriousness, I do know what people are really asking for. A step-by-step guide on how to draw a cat. You know the ones. Step 1, draw circles. Step 2, draw the rest of the owl kind of tutorial. And I've always said no. 1, because I think making a tutorial like that would be painfully boring, and it'd either be way too simple to really capture the nuances of character design, or I'd go completely feral and find myself neck deep in another stupidly large project. And 2, because I don't want to encourage young artists into thinking that I've somehow cracked the formula on how to draw cats, or that I always use some kind of tried or true method to create my characters. Sometimes I draw cats like this, and sometimes I draw cats like this. And over the numerous animations I've done, I've adapted the way that I draw to fit other styles and needs as a way to examine other ways of doing things. There is no one way to draw a cat, and I don't want young artists thinking that my way is the only way. Now, that being said, there are a ton of brilliant how to draw cat tutorials out there on the internet, made by incredibly talented artists that I 1000% recommend you go check out. Tracy Butler's various tutorials are particularly amazing, watered my crops, cleared my skin, and all that jazz. And I have a ton of respect for artists who take the time to make a good tutorial. I just don't plan on making one myself. Especially when I have my show here and all the live streams I do, where you can literally just watch me draw the thing step by step, and I have a ton of videos explaining my thought process as I draw. But I do sometimes get more specific requests for art advice, and I think I'm better equipped to tackle those subjects, like how do you make a character sheet, and how do you make a character turnaround? If those are the kinds of questions you're wondering, you're in luck. That's what this video is going to be all about, so let's jump in. I decided to use Little Pool Boy as the subject of this exercise today because he's a fairly simple character and I haven't made his more extensive reference sheet yet. Now the first thing to ask yourself when it comes to a reference sheet is, how much information do I need? I've made various character sheets over the years, and some of them are really simple, while others get into a lot more detail. Take my Sona sheet, for example. I have 2 pretty small reference sheets for them, and it just covers some basics. My color palette, my character from both sides, a sketch of the head, mouth open, paws, and some expressions. These references were made when I first drew the character and are already pretty outdated. I still use this general outline, but if you compare this reference sheet to how I actually draw my Sona and most of my sprites, you'll notice a big difference in how I exaggerate certain features and my overall shapes. But I'm not planning to update this ref anytime soon because it serves exactly the function it needs to. I'm mostly going to be the only one using it, and if others do use it, I certainly don't mind them taking liberties with the shapes and proportions. Another similar reference sheet I made was for the Better Days map. Extremely simple. Characters, mouths open, color palettes, shading suggestions with the color I used to multiply. The characters are simple enough that they don't need a turnaround, and of course every animator could animate in their own style, so the reference didn't need to get into the nitty-gritty of how the shapes of the characters are put together. If I could do this one over, I would have made the color palette spots bigger so that it was easier for the artist to color pick from, and would have also included better labeling. I probably also would have made Fireheart's design a little simpler, but that's more of an animation thing than a reference sheet thing. Now, when it came to chapter 1 of Clouded Moon, we had I want to say it was 28 characters in need of reference sheets, or some ridiculous number like that. And I was making the reference sheets as we moved into animation and production, so I was making them quickly. Luckily, Captain Snapdragon and I were mostly the ones doing the animation, and we were already pretty familiar with these characters, so simple character refs worked for the most part. It was clear to me that these wouldn't be good enough in the long run though, especially whenever we hand off animation to other animators. A lot of them don't have any references for things like their mouths or their paw pad colors. And these character sheets are missing something very important: character. So that's where these new reference sheets come in. Not only are they pretty extensive as a reference, but they showcase some smaller quirks and the expressiveness of the character, and that's useful to know for animation. Since we want Clouded Moon to have fairly consistent art direction, notes on how the character is shaped is now important. Most of these character sheets have a headshot with an expression suiting the character, detailed notes on the shapes making up the character, their color palette, clearly labeled, mouth shapes, turnarounds with some doubling as another opportunity to showcase characterization, paw reference, body posture suggestions, fur details for animation, eye shapes, notes on little tics or quirks the character might have, and some extra drawings to showcase expressions. I really do try to be as thorough as I can with these. Now, I want to reiterate, these are references that are so detailed because these characters are being animated in a long-term show format that is trying to keep the same art direction. If you don't need this level of detail for your character sheet, save yourself the time and energy, and just keep it simple. Let's say that you need a character sheet so that you can commission an artist to do your character. Most artists certainly would not say no to a reference sheet like this, but they might also find all the info on it a little overwhelming when just a simple reference like Pool's first character sheet would work just fine. If you do want to practice doing these kinds of really detailed character sheets for fun, or just as some kind of bigger project though, have at it. I will admit, it's pretty fun and satisfying to lay out a character sheet like this. I will warn you that this reference sheet alone took me just a little over 5 hours to make, and I know what I'm doing, so yeah, it does take some time and a lot of practice. The part that's always been the most fun about these, for me, is the character turnarounds. Now, if you've never done one of these before, it can be quite tricky, but once you get the hang of it, doing some more complex turnarounds can be a really fun challenge. It's going to take a decent amount of technical drawing skill and solid drawing, and obviously, the simpler your character design, the easier of a time you're going to have overall. And there's many ways that you can do turnarounds based on what you need to show off a character. For Peach, I found it best to just keep to a really simple side-side, front-back method. And I removed her tail from the back so that you can see her markings clearly. A lot of your standard turnarounds will use the T-pose, with arms sticking straight out. This is done not only for game design, but an easy way to pose the character so that you can see their arm width and any designs on the arms and the clothing underneath. The main thing you want to keep in mind while drawing a turnaround is to give yourself guidelines to make sure the character is staying a consistent size and shape. For my reference of Pool here, I put a line at the top of his head, at his shoulders, at the bottom of his chest, and at his feet. I could make even more of these lines to help guide me, but those are the most important ones that I want to show. Since Pool isn't a very complicated design, I got more creative with his posing. My final piece of advice for a turnaround such as this: while drawing, always be sure to double check your work. Compare your drawing and remeasure things again and again to make sure things are where they're supposed to be. If you're doing art digitally, there's no shame in using your resizing tool, directly copying and pasting your heads right next to each other to see if they're staying like the same size and same shape. Like, use the tools at your disposal. You don't have to freehand everything. And while we're on the topic of good character sheet practices, here's a couple more things that you should probably keep in mind when making your character sheets. Large color palettes for the artists to pick color from are very helpful, especially if the palette is labeled nicely. Under no circumstances should you ever shade your reference, unless it's for an animation or commission-specific related thing, in which case you should make sure to keep that part separated from your other character flats. But this includes things like characters' eyes. Shading a reference can make it hard to tell what color is supposed to go where. Please do not shade your references. Add some character to your character reference. A sterile-looking T-pose just isn't that fun or appealing to look at, so unless you're doing a T-pose specifically for work or your portfolio or something, spice it up a bit and showcase your character's personality a little. When working with animation, be ready to make a lot of additional notes, drawings, and mouse shapes to reference back to. And don't forget about some of the tips I shared in the Designing for Maps video if you plan on having other people animating your designs. If you're making a thorough character sheet, you might find yourself drawing the character slightly different from when you started, as opposed to when you finished. That can be a blessing, because your brain has probably found a simpler way to draw the character, so make sure to reflect that in your character sheet. And also, make sure to highlight easily missable details, like the mouth colors or the paw pads in my reference sheets. Is the accessory that your character is wearing supposed to be in the specific shape of something? Maybe it's a good idea to draw a close-up of it, or label what the shape of it is supposed to be. With that being said, please do keep additional text on your reference sheet to a minimum. This advice is more so aimed if you want a nice, clean-looking reference sheet, but extraneous details like your character's favorite color being teal, or the fact that they're a Gemini, is probably something better left in a Google Doc versus on their character sheet. Text is useful for labeling things like the color palette, or maybe even specific accessories that the character might be wearing. But remember to keep your text focused on the design itself, and not the personal reasons for why the character might be wearing it. Again, best left for a Google Doc. And last but not least, please remember that not every drawing needs to be perfect or finished. Sometimes rough sketches can be just fine for a reference. Assess your needs accordingly and work smart. Ask yourself if this is a reference just for your own sake, so the details can be a little fuzzy, or whether it needs to be legible enough for another human being to use, and if so, how much do they really need to know before going into drawing your character? You'll notice that even my detailed character sheets vary in, well, details. Some characters are more important than others, so characters like Spotted Shadow and Golden Pelt are obviously going to get pretty big character sheets, while Peaches, Pools, and especially Forest Leafs are a bit smaller due to their smaller roles. I hope that this was helpful for all of your character sheet designing questions. Go out there and show your characters to the world. Have an awesome week, and stay inspired.
If you're inspo tanks and make no mistake, you've come to the right place. Just give to Neil the time to straight up blow your mind with a new show of drawing a play.